Weather portion of AgweekTV now. We get on into March and spring planting becomes a concern. Too little moisture can be a concern. Late season snow is a concern. We are having some early spring weather. We get very warm, we get very cold in between, and often get a few snowstorms fairly late. Not too many though. We're setting up for a fairly dry pattern. In fact, as we look at the overall upper Midwest and upper Plains region, drought becomes a bit of a concern this spring. This was the drought severity, the U.S. Drought Monitor, and you can see a lot of the northern plains region is sitting in very dry weather. You get down to the Corn Belt, things right now are looking pretty good, but a little pocket of extremely dry weather around northwest Iowa, and a lot of North Dakota and South Dakota, especially the west, are actually in severe drought with no snow on the ground. A little bit of snow in southeast North Dakota and South Dakota into northern Minnesota this past week, not likely enough to make a big difference. Jet stream right now split, and the big split likely means relatively dry weather. It's also going to keep the frigid weather bottled up. In fact, we may not see any really cold weather again this winter anyway. Jet stream, the split will gradually flatten a bit as we go toward the week. That doesn't look too frightening. It's still going to be a fairly weak overall pattern. A lot of warm weather across the south, mostly comfortably warm. Really some 80s in Florida, but most of the southern states not going to be that warm this week. No real pushes of cold weather either. And toward the weekend, we're going to get some heat. Some 70s getting up into the western Dakotas and eastern Montana, at least for a few days. Next week, a split will start developing again. Looks like a temporary little weak low down in the southern Rockies. That'll move out, won't make much of an impact. Going to keep the weather fairly warm across the western high plains. It's also going to be dry in these areas. The only rain will be in the southeast and the northwest. The second week of the period, we're also talking about some pretty dry weather in the Great Plains. In fact, it may not be any precipitation at all. I don't mean the entire east will have nothing. This is where there might be a scattered rain or snow event, probably mostly rain, snow maybe in New England, but overall the pattern continues to look fairly dry. Now, last week, we took a gander at the future outlook for spring planting, and really this hasn't changed much, but it's worthy of mention again. As we get into the second half of March, it does look fairly mild and wet around the Corn Belt, so where it is wet in the Corn Belt, it'll likely continue to be modestly wet. I don't mean too wet, I just mean there'll be moisture here. The Great Plains, the High Plains, the Rockies looking pretty dry. And as we go into the month of April, I expect dry weather will really take over. We go from cool and damp to warm and dry in the eastern Corn Belt, and generally cool and dry over much of the northern plains region. Looks like a dry April.